Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. Today's a little bit weird for a couple reasons. I'm on an old computer that is really laggy, so I apologize. But Russell Rush, my guest today, is on a great computer. And if you tuned in thinking, oh, I'm going to listen to what Sevy Petras says about why the industry is great, she had a last minute thing come up. And so I asked my good friend Russell Rush to join me today. You will learn some amazing things from him. He is the best senior living salesperson I have ever met. He crushes it in a way that nobody else does. He doesn't do it like anybody else, and he fills buildings like crazy. So we are going to get into a conversation about the industry and why we're not full and how we can be full right after this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Welcome, Russell.
Hey, Steve. How are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm excellent. Really good.
Good. So just before we went on the air, you were talking about your most recent project that you did, actually two projects that you filled up. And I'd like to have you just sort of set the stage by talking about the numbers in terms of how many units and how long it took you to get it done.
Well, we had two projects we've done. These were the 12th and 13th project we'd done for our customer, both in Florida. And we had one we opened. It was delayed due to construction issues. These were both new construction. And we had the first day we opened with 90 move-ins, which it's a 150 unit building. That's about 65% occupancy day one. And we filled the building within a few months. Between the two buildings, we were averaging about 23, 24 move-ins a month. And we filled both buildings, 11 months, filled both buildings up. So that's
okay. And so go ahead.
Because we were doing both buildings at the same time. But we were averaging about 23, 24 move-ins a month.
Okay. And these were all independent living.
All independent living, yes. Yeah.
And you had like a team of 5 or 6 salespeople that were helping you do this?
There's me and one assistant.
For both buildings?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Correct.
So, and so that must have meant these were like in markets that were really had already high occupancy and really highly impacted, which made it easier to get those kinds of numbers, right?
No. So the average tours on the one was about 3.75 tours per week, and the other one was about 4.1 tours per week. So these were not high demand communities, no.
So what's your close to tour ratio?
Well, we did some tweaking during the pandemic, which was obviously the most challenging thing that we had all been through. But of recent, we average about 71% of tour to move-in rate. Prior to the pandemic, we were like 52% for years. And then post-pandemic, we made some changes to our presentations and increased that up to 71%. And that's the reason for our results. So if we had 10 tours, what we call tours in our industry, we'd get 7 people to move into the community.
Okay, so these are like crazy numbers. I think there's sort of a general. I've over the last few months, I have come across two that I can think of. One I've written about, another one I'm going to write about, where these communities have hit 100% occupancy. But I think that generally speaking, that 100% occupancy buildings are sort of seen as, if you will, black swans. We know that they happen, but they just seem to be sort of random events that you can't predict and you can't replicate. And you seem to be defying that. Can you talk to me a little? I mean, are there enough people out there?
Yes, there's no question. There's enough consumers out there to fill most communities in most locations across the United States. We've worked in 7 states and multiple markets with our company, and it's the same consumer, the same situation that's developing in each location. And we're sent to tough locations. That's where they send us to. If they're having trouble with the interest in the community, that's typically where we're sent. We're not sent to communities that where there's a lot of interest, or they wouldn't hire someone like us to come along. But we believe that there's adequate interest in senior living in most markets to fill most communities. We believe that the problem is at the point of sale. We think that when the consumer's engaged by the local salesperson, they're not following certain methods in order to educate the consumer so that the consumer will take the action to choose senior living. And because there's now more options in home care, home health, mostly caregiving systems, the consumer may make the decision to stay home and hire a caregiver, or if they don't need a caregiver yet, just stay home. And so, because it's easy to stay home, that's their number one interest, their choice, it's their preference. The consumer has a preference to stay home. They're inquiring or looking into senior living, but that doesn't mean they're going to take action. So what we focus our efforts on when the consumer comes in, when the potential resident who we want to live in the community, the qualified resident, we focus on education in order to prompt action, which is a different structure. So we don't really care about the deliverables in the community. Every community has food and housekeeping and transportation and some emergency services or concierge services. So that really is irrelevant to us. We're more focused on helping the consumer understand why they should live in the community and really educating them and then getting them to take action. And we're highly successful.
So what you really taught, you have this formula that you've developed that goes, what is it? Relate, reason, resolve equals results. And I think it might be worthwhile for us to actually talk a little bit about each of those elements of them. And I guess the first thing I'm going to ask is does the order matter?
No, really doesn't. You could reverse a lot of the order, and in some circumstances you will be forced to, because people don't always behave like we want them to. So if the potential resident or their family member, their influencer, is asking for more information up front and they won't take the time to get to know me as a person so that they can trust me and like me, then I'm going to give them a little more information, then revert back to my relating. So you can the order can be changed, but the result needs to be the same. All those elements need to be there in order to have an effective engagement or presentation with a potential resident or their influencer. And as you know, Steve, more than anybody, influencers are playing a bigger and bigger role in the decision-making process of family members. So if they get the impression that their mom or dad or parents would be better off staying at home, you're done.
Well, as you said earlier, staying home is pretty much easier, right? I mean, you're already there. It at least feels less expensive. I'm not sure that it always is less expensive. And so it makes perfect sense. The thing I want to come back to a little bit, because you said something that I think is actually mind blowing. You said I think I'm going to put words in your mouth, and so correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of said the product doesn't matter. Is that right?
Not really. I mean, as long as it's being delivered properly. I mean, as long as there is the operator is, delivering the meals and they're doing housekeeping, you can't have horrible service. But if most operators are doing their best to deliver a decent service, that's what they're doing. And so that's there. The big question is why should the resident live in the community? And so I shop communities myself. I go and act as if my mother, who's deceased, is still alive, and act as if I'm looking for a place for her. I've done it recently on a couple of communities. And the one element that the sales representative left out was why my mom should live in the community.
So you find that to be consistently the problem?
Yes. They never talk about why. They never explained to me why my mom should move. All they do is talk to me about deliverables, food, housekeeping, care. But they never explained to me why. Why should we do this? Why should I make my mom move?
Why do you think salespeople miss this?
I don't know. I don't know if it's an industry issue, if they just assume that the consumer knows why, or what it is, but they're not communicating why. And that's I mean, can you imagine going to purchase any other product or service that you're not sure you want to buy, and somebody not explaining to you why you should do it? I mean, to me, that's exactly what's happening. I just did this 3 times in the last week or so. I had reasons for our company to have to go shop some close by communities, and know why again.
So, okay. So let's actually talk about, let's pretend that we're shopping for my mom, who's also gone.
Yeah.
And I want to, so why should my mom move in?
Well, I think that's the critical element. One of the things that we do when someone comes in is we make sure we ask them why they're there. Because there's not just going and looking at senior living because they want to go look at a building or look at an apartment or, eat the food. That's not why they're there. So we want to understand what's motivating them. And then we want to tap in to that motivation so that we can help them by explaining why. In other words, where my goals line up with the influencers, because most of the time we're dealing with influencers. Sometimes we're dealing with a resident, but where our goals line up with the influencer or resident's goals. And so we would have an explanation of why. Typically, our explanation revolve around the people are going to have better outcomes. If I'm not going to be better off living in your community versus staying at home with a caregiver or by myself, why do it?
So do you think it's possible that senior living professionals don't actually believe that their residents are better off?
It could be. I mean, the first sale we have to make, obviously, is ourselves. We have to believe that we're helping seniors live better lives, which I do, and that the consumer, the senior, and their family member are going to be better off if that age senior is living in the community versus staying home. And so, yes, that would be absolutely a requirement that the salesperson would care enough about the potential resident, as well as also be able to help them understand that they're going to have a better outcome, because everything's about outcomes. And so this is our a big part of our process is helping people understand that they're going to have better outcomes. And we know there's more seniors that can afford the service, that need the service, than there are apartments right now. And we know that the occupancy, based on Nick, is lower than what it should be dramatically coming out of the pandemic, which was catastrophic. I want to talk, if I can take 2 seconds and talk about that, Steve. The pandemic was a legitimate problem for senior living. It was almost impossible to sell senior living when the problem was people living together, getting sick together, and potentially dying. So that was like the perfect storm for senior living. However, the problem is now we're post-pandemic. There is no pandemic anymore. So
Russell, I'm going to stop you for a second. I have to go grab a computer from the front door that's being delivered. You keep talking.
Okay. So
we're do that with a live stream.
No. So we're post-pandemic now. So we're no longer in the pandemic. And so now we can convince people to come in, and the chances, obviously, of us dealing with this in our lifetime again is almost zero. So we don't really have a situation where we're going to probably repeat this. One of the things I talked with Steve about prior to us coming online was back in 2016, occupancy started to decline. So between 2010 and 2016, there was a lot of new buildings. And by 2016, occupancy started to decline, and there was some conversation that maybe the industry was overbuilt. But we were quick filling buildings in 2016. And so we noted that there really wasn't a demand issue where there was too much supply for the demand, but really it was a change in consumer behavior and how they were buying senior living, because now they have more options. So if you go back in time from 2016 back to the mid 90s, in the mid 90s, there were virtually no caregiving companies like a Home Instead or all the numbers or home care. Now there's thousands of these organizations with the same message. Don't move into a retirement community. Stay home and let us care for you at home. And so that has created a new level of competition for senior living that we've never addressed. We act as if we're the only one in the game when we're really not. We're not the only one in the game. The consumer has options. And so the consumer could exercise their options, which drives our occupancy down.
Yeah, and I just think that I think this is such a critical thing to talk about, because while I get that, I think that there are cases where home care really is the best option for certain individuals. It's mostly a pretty terrible option, because even if you have somebody coming into your community, into your home, providing care, you're not creating a living experience that's really living. It's just somebody delivering care. And I know this, I've experienced it. I bought some home care from my mom a number of years ago, and it provided the physical care, but it added nothing to her emotional state, her quality of life at all.
Yeah, and one of our listeners is commenting on social isolation. It really doesn't resolve the number one problem the consumer or the resident is having, which is social isolation. So senior living is the antidote to social isolation, which is the reason that's either could be contributing to the health issues of the resident, probably is, or is certainly contributing to their state of mind and wellness. And so, again, that's part of the why. And so we, again, as a group of a community of senior living professionals, we have to really ask ourselves. And then let's say that we start doing a good job explaining why people should live in our community. And let's say we did that for a month and our occupancy started to go up because more people were convinced to go ahead and take action and move in. Well, then let's say we stop and we revert back to our old habits of showing the deliverables. Nothing's changed. So there has to be a fundamental change in the behavior of the frontline people in order to make this a more global change. And if everyone was explaining why people should use senior living better, then the consumer would then just be choosing between, well, is this location better for me? Do they have a better service that I'm looking for? Versus, I'm still moving. I'm going to leave home because I'm convinced I should. Now, where am I going to go? And so but right now, that's not what's happening. What's happening is the consumer's going out, they're becoming convinced to stay home by the salesperson at the particular community or communities, and they're just staying home.
Yeah. So on one of the things I'm going to actually do a little commercial break here. While I agree with you largely that the product isn't as important, you can certainly make it more important by creating a better living experience. And so I want to remind our viewers today that in just a little bit over a month, we are hosting the Evolve Conference for life that's all about how to create better living experiences for residents. And this is really, it is really the only event that really tackles this question in depth. We've got industry leaders who are going to come in and talk about how to create a great living experience for your residents, for your family members, and for other team members. It's all virtual. It happens over a 2-week period, 3 hours a day, twice a week in the afternoons. It's really designed for life enrichment people. We think if your life enrichment team ought to be there, you are an executive director, you ought to be there. If you're a sales director, you ought to be there. It'll give you ideas on how to tell this story, how to convince people that living in senior living is a better option for them. And so you can find information for it at the Senior Living Foresight webpage. On the upper right-hand corner, it says events, and there's a drop-down menu, and it is so cheap. We probably should be charging double or triple what we are, but we're committed to making the lives of residents and team members better. So I hope you join us for that. So I'm going to actually, Russell, we're going to get back to this conversation, but I want to do a couple of lightning questions with you. Sure. First one's real easy. Would you rather text or talk on the phone?
Talk on the phone.
Good. Would you rather read a book, listen to a book, or watch a video?
Read a book.
Read a book. And what's the worst job you've ever had?
I've had really good jobs. I've had a great career, so I don't know. I believe every job taught me something that I took to the next one. So I would say I never had a bad job.
Okay. And have you ever gotten any bad career advice?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Can you give me one?
I would have to think about that. I don't know if I could give you one right off the top of my head, but I'm sure I've got some bad career advice.
Yeah. I'm sure we all have. So let's actually, I want to actually be really helpful to the audience here in the remaining time we have. Can you talk to me about how the process that you use to convince people that they're better off living in senior living, that they're going to have a better outcome?
Okay. So in my process, which I wrote a book on, I wrote the book R3R1, The Sales Formula for Success. But in that, I delineate what I'm talking to you about. So when senior living salespeople, a lot of them do a decent job of relating. So when the consumer, which is the potential resident, and their influencer come in, they'll get to know them on a personal basis, which is very important because that's where trusting is involved. And then they're not bad, a lot of them, at resolving. In other words, what care needs the person needs, or what kind of an apartment they could afford, or when they could move in and live in the community. Those are resolving issues. And I think our salespeople and the communities are probably pretty good at that, most of them. Where they struggle is on the reasoning part. That's the convincing the consumer and their influencer why they should take action. And so the best illustration I can give you, Steve, is to be like me getting up in front of a jury, and I'm a lawyer, and I would say, my name's Russell Rush. I'm a farmer from Kansas. I'm a great guy, because I'm trying to get the jury to like me, right? And then I would say, my client is completely innocent of these charges, and I feel like you should acquit them. Thank you. So I never made my case. You see my point? So that's what's happening. That's exactly what's going on. So they never make their case. So they never reason. So if you don't reason, you're dead most of the time, unless that consumer is buying and doesn't require anybody to convince them. You got a problem. And the majority of senior living prospects and their influencers are reluctant buyers. They don't really want to buy this service. They're buying it only because they think it's a last choice, that they've gotten to the point where they have to use the service. So we don't want that to be the situation at all. We want it to be where that would be their first choice, but that takes education and reasoning. And that is that's the key element of what's missing. And so when we're dealing, we have a saying in our organization goes like this: if someone coming in doesn't need to be persuaded, and I try to persuade them, there's no harm. But if they did need to be persuaded and I don't try to persuade them, I'm dead. I've lost the opportunity to sell that individual. So that is our logic. So we are never assuming that the consumer's buying. And I think that's a lot of what happens in our industry, unfortunately, is that since people have bought in the past, since we have some occupancy, we're assuming that the interested person is more interested than what they are.
So what I think I hear you saying is that when a prospect walks in, you go in, you almost have this attitude that if you are not able to persuade them to move in, you've done a horrible disservice to them as a human being.
That's absolutely correct. And I assume that the majority of them are not going to make the decision to move in without a lot of reasoning. And so, and consistently, and this all happens on the first encounter that I have with the consumer and the potential resident and their influencer. So consistently, the residents, after they agree to move in, they will say to me, I never would have made this decision had I not met you. And you know what I say to them? You're right.
So talk to me a little bit more about how I'm a salesperson and I'm watching this video and I'm saying, so I'm going to hold on to that question for a second. I think perhaps one of the reasons why people don't do a very good job of persuading is that what's going through their head is that persuading is equal to manipulation.
Well, we don't view it that way at all. We view it as educating. So we're educators. In fact, one of the things that we get feedback from the residents and their family members, they'll say, I didn't really understand why I needed to use the service. Now I understand why. So we're really educating them. And a number of them will say to us when we're done with our encounter with them, and we document all this because we are somewhat scientific, because we're trying to get to higher performance. They'll say to me consistently, I'm glad I met you instead of a salesperson, which means that they didn't view me as a salesperson. They viewed me as an educator. If somebody ever said to me, you're a whale of a salesperson, I would think, I need to do a better job of educating that person because I didn't educate them, because my purpose is not in selling them. It's in helping them understand why they should use the service. And I sincerely care about their family member because I know that if their family member stays home by themselves and languishes, they're not going to have as good an outcome.
So do you talk about that? Do you talk about the negative outcomes as you're doing this education?
Absolutely.
So can you maybe role play that with me just a little bit?
Sure. So we talk about when we're with the family members, we talk about the fact that the person is suffering from social isolation, poor nutrition, lack of exercise, whatever the issues are, and say the reason that's the situation is because you're by yourself. You need people. And so if we can help you come and live with us, we're the remedy, we're the solution to your problem. And so that's really the crux of it. So our whole communication basis is a form of reasoning with them to get them to understand that they're better off. If they don't understand that they're better off using our service than not using it, we're done. It's over. So we have to persuade the person, reason with them, and help them understand that they're going to have a better outcome. It's all about outcomes.
So I want to pop up this question that just came up. I love this question. I already know the answer, and that's why I was smiling. So once you have somebody walk in your building and you do a tour, how many other tours or how many other touches do you have with them before the move in typically?
Well, before they make a decision to reserve an apartment? Is that your question? And start the move-in
Yeah.
process? So
Yeah.
because of the way our process works, it's one. So the first time we meet the influencer or their family member, we commit them on that first meeting to reserve an apartment. The rest of any other follow-up meetings would be what we would call retours, but they've already selected an apartment, reserved it. We've already set a time for them to move in. That all happens on the first meeting with them, because we found out statistically, the more meetings we have with them, the lower the likelihood of them actually converting, because then all they're doing is persuading themselves not to move in.
So when you talk about doing retours with those people, that's really just in terms of maybe they've got another family member needs to see it, or they're looking at furniture placement or that kind of thing.
Exactly. That's it. And if the other family member comes in and we figure out they're an influencer, we would repeat the same messaging to the new family member about outcomes. So, but it's normally a selection of furniture, trying to figure out how the house sale's going, those kind of things. Sometimes people will have to delay a move in because their house didn't sell, if they don't have the financial resources to afford to live in the community. So those kind of issues, but those are more resolving issues. Those aren't persuading issues. And those are
one of the things. So one of the numbers I hear a lot is it spans a lot, but I hear things like you've got to have 26 touches before somebody decides to move in. And it sounds like you're defying that.
That's our service. Our system does it. We have typically our contact to commitment time is about 6 days. So from the time the person initially contacts us to the time we have them on a reservation is 6 days and one meeting. So they'll contact us, we'll message them, they'll come in, we will do our presentation, and then schedule a move-in. So we know about the 3 to 6 month time. So the sales cycle, we don't believe in that at all, to be candid with you. And I'm in my 14th year, thousands of move-ins down the road. So obviously.
Have you ever had a fail?
No. Nope. We have 100% win rate. We've never had a fail. In fact, not only have we not had a fail, we've actually accelerated our conversion rate, went from 52 to 71%. So,
so one of the things I want to we're over time here, but I actually want to touch bases on one other thing. I'm working. I was telling you I'm working on an article on this because I think that the lead aggregators are actually destroying senior living. I've seen two statistics that suggest the number for every 100. The best number I've seen is for every 100 leads coming out of lead aggregator, the best number is about 15 move-ins, which means that there are 85 that are just junk. I saw another statistic just this week in a presentation where they're only showing 6% of lead aggregator leads are moving in. That means that a salesperson is having to work 94 leads in order to get 6 moves ins, which is just what a horrible waste of time. When you, and I know you worked in some buildings where you get these lead aggregators, how do you process those? How do you work through those so that they don't just sap you of time and energy?
Well, they're a nuisance to us at this point. The quality of the leads that are being generated are very poor quality. It's almost like they're mailing the phone book. And so they're not really researching the quality or the if this is a qualified prospect to meet the community's standard of what is a prospect. And so the definition of who we're looking for and their level of interest. And so, we actually did a project several years ago in 2017 where our customer, because we're contractors, our customer paid us not to use a lead aggregator. And we filled the building in 11 months. And we would prefer not to use them, to be candid with you, because our customer that we've been working for has been using that same aggregator, and we would prefer not to use them. If they could decide to dismiss them, we would be perfectly happy.
So when you were working them, and this is just to be helpful because I think there are lots of people who are sort of stuck with them.
Yeah, sure.
How did you work them in a way that was efficient so you didn't waste a lot of time?
That's very hard. And I have a person who works with me, and we would, try to drill into the information, but like you say, a high percentage of them, over 80%, are not qualified leads. And so it will just waste your time. And so one could become jaded and just say, I'm not going to follow up on these people, but that's probably not a solution also, but it's definitely a problem. And I think that the industry needs to address it, because they're not really providing the service to us that they're selling to us, which is that these are sourced, researched leads, because they're not.
Yeah. So Russell, thank you very much. We are past out of time. I love your passion for helping people, your passion for the industry. I wish we could clone you. And I would recommend that everybody who's watching this go out and get his book. You can get it at Amazon, other places besides Amazon's probably the best way to get it.
Right. Yeah.
And it is a very readable book, and it will help you sell senior living better. If you're in the vendor community, it'll actually help you sell your vendor community. It's been a good refresh for me. I'm thinking about some things as we sell things at Foresight that we could do better with that reasoning process. So I appreciate your time. You know how to reach him. I appreciate those of you who are watching, who are making a difference in the industry, because every time we move in somebody, every time we touch a resident or a team member, we are making the world a better place. And I think that sometimes we forget that. So thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Russell, hang on for just a minute after we're done. And I want to say also, I always forget to do this, Jada, who is running things behind the scenes, putting up all those comments and managing things. Thank you very much for doing that as well.